Hello, everyone, and welcome to Caregiving Gen X Style. I'm Steve Mullen.
And I'm Jennifer Mullen.
Weather events like snowstorms, hurricanes, even severe thunderstorms and tornadoes can disrupt your caregiving routine immensely. We recently had a couple of rounds of snow here, which led to some completely unexpected and troubling problems. We'll talk in a minute about what those problems were, but we thought it would be a good idea in this episode to do an entire show on how to prepare for caregiving when weather turns bad. We will get into that in a moment, but first, Jennifer, how's your mom?
Well, you mentioned other, what did you say, troubling problems maybe?
Troubling side effects.
Troubling side effects. We had something very interesting happen here in our region. Mm-hmm. The storm came through. The first winter weather came through.
We had two snowstorms that came through. What were they, about a week and a half apart, something like that?
Not even that far apart.
No. Maybe a week apart. Yeah. So please.
So first storm comes through, and of course we're going to talk in a minute. Obviously that's what most of this episode is about. But in our part of the world, there was an issue with the water treatment plant that affected the water supply
in the entire metro area. Well, really about half of the metro area.
We live in a county just outside of the main city where this happened, but and at first we didn't really think there was going to be an effect to us necessarily.
At first there wasn't.
Probably about 24 hours later, there was an effect. Now, there was an effect, of course, to our daughter who lives
in the city.
So she came home, thankfully, not too far away, came home to stay with us for the night, though, of course, the issues continued. And then really the issues started here.
But where was Jennifer?
As luck would have it, I actually had a work trip scheduled out of state. I was down in Atlanta, but I'm going to mention something about that in just a minute too. So I was down in Atlanta. I leave really the morning before, several hours before the water issues started to affect us here in our home. So I really missed most of the chaos.
Yeah, it's funny how that works out. I've been saying all week, I had a nasty case of COVID a year or two ago, and you were in Indianapolis.
I was in Indianapolis.
Yeah, how nice for you.
And by the way, let me just say, I don't travel extensively for work. I mean,
it's just how it works out. Whatever you do, you miss something that you want to miss.
A year. Yeah, I'd like to note for the record that when you had COVID a handful of years ago, I was ready to hop on a plane. I was going to come straight home. I was very worried about you. But I did miss all of that craziness. And then, fast forward a couple of years to this week. And the funny thing was I was actually a little frustrated that I had scheduled this particular trip. I mean, it was a conference I was attending, and it was the week that it was scheduled for. I didn't have much choice. But I had taken off the week in between Christmas and New Year's. So I actually did a pretty good job of disconnecting this year.
You did. Which
was delightful. But then it was, not only did I have to hit the ground running to get myself back in a work mode, it was hit the ground running and immediately, get on a plane and really be out of the office for another, better part of a week. And then, of course, the snow comes in. And part of my role where I work is internal communication. So there was a lot of activity related to, notifying employees about offices closing and delays, et cetera. And then, of course, the water issue kicks in throughout the week. So I'm dealing with that from a work perspective while I'm out of state. Of course, I have a fantastic team, it's perfectly in capable hands. But then listening to, you guys here, you and Jackson talking about all the woes, I was enjoying my very hot, high-pressured showers.
Right, and we didn't have water for a period. I'm going to chart through it in a second. We didn't have water for a period, and then when we did have water, it was a bare trickle. And we were on a boil water notice. And then Jennifer goes to an event at
an aquarium. There was a lot of water there.
They had so much water down there, they just gave it away to the fishes.
Gave it away to the fish and the sea lions and the beluga whales.
Right.
But all of this started. Jennifer, how's your mom? My mom is doing great, right? She's doing great. But I was out of town in the middle of this situation happening. Of course, as anyone who's been listening to this podcast at all knows that, I'm very fortunate. I also have a brother who lives here locally, and he was all over it. Of course, he was also dealing with his own situation at his house, which started before ours.
Right, they live in
here.
the city limits as well.
Right, so they don't have water. He, did come over initially to help Mom with a few things and make sure she had boiled water and bottled water and, all those things. But then, like, he had a day where, like, he's got to focus on him and he doesn't have stuff. And I'm asking you from Atlanta, hey, Steve, can you check on my mom? Can you, I can't remember, there was one day, like I knew my brother was dealing with one thing and I said, do you mind? Can you please just run over there?
Ran over there. I brought him some bottled water.
Paper plates and things, right? Because you couldn't even, you weren't supposed to wash your dishes. There were so many things you weren't supposed to do, even when we had the running water, which we didn't for a period of time. But even when we had the running water, we were under a boil advisory. So it's not like you could just turn on the tap and brush your teeth and wash your face and do all these things. You had to be really careful. So I do have to say, all joking aside, that I basically missed most of the inconvenience of it. I'm so fortunate. I know that I have both my brother who lives here locally and my wonderful husband here sitting across the dining room table. That would be you, so, to make sure that things were taken care of for my mom. So that was
basically
great.
What happened. I mean, we had this snowstorm from Sunday into Monday, and Monday morning, the city's water treatment plant just goes kaput in a very difficult to fix way. So the city water goes down. There is no water in the city by that afternoon. That's where our daughter lives. She came, as you mentioned, she came to stay with us so she could take a shower. But our county, which had switched over to like water towers, we then ran out of water a day later. And then we didn't have water. And, a day later, we had, like I said, a bare trickle, which was really just enough to flush toilets. And you couldn't really do much else with it. But so we had, like you said, we had to make sure your mother was taken care of. And the water started coming back, but we were on a boil water advisory for several more days. And also it extended to where my mother lives in assisted living.
Steve, how's your mom?
Yeah, so it extended to where my mother lives in assisted living. So when I heard about that, because she lives in a different county, but also nearby. And I called her up. I said, so you're on a boil water advisory. Oh, no, I hadn't heard about that. Well, they brought a bunch of water in. And I'm thinking they probably told you. You just weren't paying attention.
I'm sure she was told, number one. And number two, reminder, right? Your mom doesn't have a stove in her apartment. Of course, I guess she has running water.
Yeah, she
but
does
anyway,
wash dishes by hand. So she had to know about that. And they were taking care of them there. They had to shift their food prep, which is a big thing. No glasses of iced tea, and all these ladies drink iced tea. Yeah. Coffee, we found out, is okay because it boils.
Thank goodness, because let me tell you what. When I went to the airport on the morning to go catch my flight, I am a coffee drinker. For anyone out there who does not know me, I am a coffee drinker. And there is an incident that we talk about in this family from many years ago when I was chaperoning a field trip for our son. And it was like a 3-day field trip. And the science teacher assured me that she was going to have coffee that I could share, except I didn't find out until 3 days in, where I had a headache so bad that I thought I was probably dying of a brain tumor, that it was decaffeinated coffee. So caffeine withdrawal, a real thing. I go to the airport and I literally had this moment of panic. We weren't on any kind of advisory at that point when I left the house, except that I was like, I'm not going to make coffee here. I'm going to the airport early. I'll just grab, get through security, grab my coffee, whatever. And as I'm walking up to the kiosk, which is mostly dead, oh my goodness, what am I going to do? However, so I said, can I get coffee? Well, we just have regular coffee. I'm like, that's great. That's all I need. That's all I drink anyway. But yeah, that was a real thing, right? Because our son works at the coffee shop, and there was the whole concern about that.
That's the thing.
And
so, when
good news is, though, all the old ladies probably also drink a lot of coffee too. So
most of them do. My mother does not.
Your mom does not.
And as a result, I don't, and neither does my brother. By the way,
weird.
My father did. I think occasionally when he was at work, he'd have a cup of coffee. But we were a tea family. We were a hot tea family. But anywho, so, I had to check with my mother. I made sure she had water. I brought her some more water when I was there yesterday. And she was fine. She was just trying to work out in her head what she was allowed to do and what she was not allowed to do. And, can I wash dishes? You probably shouldn't. No. She said, okay. I said, well, use paper plates. Oh, I've got plenty of that. Yes, you do. So, it was all fine. It wasn't a big deal. And the water restriction was lifted today. We were on 5 days of water restrictions, boil advisory. Well, for the first day, we didn't have any water at all. But then 4 days of boil water. The city was on 6 days. It was quite the crisis.
It was a little crazy. It was definitely an unexpected bump in the road on top of what we knew was already going to happen, which was the weather, which we were, planning ahead for that and making sure the moms had what they needed in case everyone was kind of hunkered down for a couple of days. Yeah,
we were just thinking of travel problems, which is an issue. But the storm really actually wasn't all that bad for around here. We actually hadn't had measurable snow in this area for 3 years, which is not really normal for around here, but we just had a gap there. But now we've had 2 measurable snowstorms in about a week, and they're saying another one next week.
Yeah.
But so that's what's going on. That kind of spurred this episode a little bit.
Yes.
But before we get to that, we do have a couple of listener things to talk about. I got a "How's your mom?" from a listener named Andy. Andy and his brother are dual primaries. They said they have several other brothers who are secondary. They have jobs to do, different jobs to do. His mom was recently moved from independent living to assisted living due to dementia, which then got worse after the move. So this is the "How's your mom?" We received a call from the secondary caregivers reporting that mom's phone was not charging and that she could not work the TV. Technology issues. We've talked about them many times. There was also a long text chain about mom desperately needing tissues. One sibling said she needed them. Another one said, "No, I just bought 2 boxes." So I drive down there, and what I found was comical. There's a closet behind the front door. There were 2 boxes of unopened tissues. Her previous residents did not have that closet next to the front door. So even though that she's been there for a month, she hasn't acquainted herself to where things are being kept.
Yeah.
So second issue, the mobile phone was not charging. I found 3 cords, all unplugged from the extension cord. The plug from the extension cord was plugged into itself. Very useful. Third issue, she could not find the TV remote. It was found next to the bed, saddled in the landline phone cradle.
Oh, my.
The charging cradle for the landline phone.
Yeah, goodness.
Dementia is terrible. You can't fix it. Try to find an aide to help with daily tasks. It just sucks all around.
Yeah.
He did say his mother did pass away in the fall, approximately 10 weeks after moving to assisted living and 2 weeks after her 93rd birthday, but she's in a better place with their dad, where she wanted to be for the last 10 years. But Andy said he had listened to our podcast and he really appreciated it, so he wanted to send us this kind of funny "How's your mom?"
Well, Andy, we appreciate you sharing that story with us. Certainly sorry to hear about the passing of your mom, of course, but do appreciate you sharing and reminding, as Steve and I try to do. You do sometimes have to find the humor in all of this. Because,
absolutely.
Right? If you don't laugh, you're going to cry.
You're going to cry.
That's for sure. I don't really have, speaking of listener feedback, I don't have a specific full email to read, maybe just a snippet of it. But over the holiday break, I have a good friend who I worked with 25 years ago, and she moved across the world a very long time ago. She was intending to stay just for a brief period of time, but fell in love with it. She now lives in Prague. She met her husband. She has a delightful life over there. But I was very fortunate that she was home for a few weeks recently and had the chance to see her. And she had also shared our podcast with her mom. And much to my delight, her mom did start listening to our podcast, and I got a couple of really nice emails recently. One of them, in fact, I think maybe the first one came from my friend who said, "Hey, by the way, I keep walking by my mom's sewing room and I'm hearing yours and Steve's voices coming from it." She said, "So I feel like you're here with me all the time right now." But her mom also emailed a couple of times to let us know how much she was enjoying the podcast. I'll read this one thing. She said, "My husband and I have been through this with my parents and his mother, all deceased now, and you two are spot on about your topics, experience, and advice," which that was
spot on.
That was really, really nice to hear. She did say that she could have used these podcasts from 2006 to 2020 when they were, she says, tearing their hair out. They were dealing with all of the everyday challenges and feeling all of the, emotions of the things that we've been discussing, and saying that, there's really such a learning curve for these situations when one is first experiencing them, which is oh so true. And so I really just wanted to say thank you to my friend's mom for sharing that with us. We've said it before. Steve and I started this a couple of years ago to be really just a very cathartic process for us. But we get so excited when we get emails and voicemails
really
from listeners who are letting us know, that they appreciate what we're talking about. And by the way, thank you all for listening, to us, even when we have squirrels and we sometimes kind of veer here, there, and everywhere with these episodes.
We do that in every episode.
Talking about stuff. I'm pretty sure we've already done it so far in this episode.
Oh, absolutely. This How's Your Mom portion took quite a long time.
It did. Yeah. But, we appreciate hearing from people that, no matter what their situation is, because we're all in slightly different situations, that this is maybe sometimes helpful to them. So that makes me happy.
And, I look at the stats for this podcast, and I know people are listening, but when we get stuff through email, text, whatever, it's just, these are actual people.
Real people.
That we're reaching.
Yes.
It's so cool.
It's awesome.
We really like it.
Yeah.
So let's get into the episode. So as we mentioned, we recently had some bad weather here. We talked all about it. It led to this unexpected water problem. But in general, situations like snowstorms, hurricanes, severe thunderstorms, and so on, and whatever else you can think of, they disrupt daily routines. And as we know, a daily routine is very important to many elderly loved ones, even ones who don't have dementia. I mean, your mother, she listens, she watches her Today show, and then she watches this show. And absolutely. So we've worked up some tips to make a basic situation like a power outage. We're going to use that mostly as the example here, which is a common thing with all of the things I mentioned, hurricanes, snowstorms, whatever else, to make it more manageable. So most of these tips are designed for people who live with their elderly loved ones or who would bring them to stay when the weather gets bad. We've done that with Goggy before.
Yeah.
If your loved one is in an assisted living or a nursing home like my mother, the facility tends to take care of them, and they usually have a backup generator, so they're going to be in much better shape than most people unless you have a backup generator. Yeah. So that helps immensely.
So the first tip, first and foremost, plan ahead. Poor weather can bring power outages, disruptions in communications, and even like we had a loss of drinkable water. Mm-hmm. But the good news about living in this day and age is that forecasting has improved so much. We know days in advance when a snowstorm or hurricane is coming, and even have some advance notice for when tornadoes are more likely. And by the way, speaking of squirrels, I'm going to give just a little squirrel here for a moment. Steve wishes that if he could do life all over again, that his career path would be to become a meteorologist.
It's absolutely, well, really more of a weather chaser. I think I'd want to be a weather chaser.
A weather chaser, that too. But he is
storm chaser,
sort of
whatever.
Our neighborhood's de facto weatherman. So he manages our neighborhood's Facebook page, number one.
Yes.
But number two, whether it's on whether it's on your personal page or the neighborhood Facebook page, you are often providing very good forecasts. And I once had a coworker and friend who is a listener of this podcast tell me that she often specifically waits for your forecasts, Steve's forecasts, because she says that you do a really good job of taking sort of in all of the information from all of the different places, kind of distilling it down and putting it out there in a very digestible format.
And I appreciate that, even though I am not the least bit trained.
Even a little bit. We joked once about we should install a green screen in our living room so that you could.
It would make me so happy.
Yeah. And another squirrel during the pandemic when we were trying to amuse ourselves and spent all our time on the back deck, which we still do, but did the work from home pajama day forecast.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I got to explain that now. So I've been working from home since 2006, and suddenly during the pandemic, everyone or almost everyone is working from home. So I decided to take it upon myself. I did daily forecasts, but also told people which pajamas to wear the next day.
Yep.
Because
it was novel to everyone. It was novel to everyone to not be leaving their house and to be working from home. And even though obviously the situation was a very dire situation, as we just said a little while ago, even in the most unfortunate situations, you got to find a little humor. So that was how we found our humor. We even ended up with some sponsors for the work from home pajama day forecast. But anyway, back to the planning ahead.
We'll get back from that squirrel.
Yes.
Put the squirrel back in his pen.
Okay, he's back in his pen. So back to the, we have a lot of advance notice now for weather situations.
Because of people like me.
because of people like you,
non-trained weather
and also the
forecasters.
trained meteorologists.
Yeah, people who
are
actually
out
know what
there.
they're talking about. So some planning can take place days or even months in advance. For instance, if you have, all right, hurricane season, you know when hurricane season is, when you know if you're in an area that tends to get hurricanes, you know generally when they're going to come. So also, you know, when you get into the winter, if you're in an area that gets snowstorms, you know when that tends to happen. So you can do some of this stuff way in advance.
Beginning of the season, right?
Yeah, exactly.
When you know what's coming. Yeah.
For instance, you could make sure you have plenty of drinkable water, which we really learned about this week.
Very important.
And thankfully, we actually had some here. It was just left over from camping. We were really beneficial.
Yeah.
But drinkable water, batteries, canned food. Make sure you have a manual can opener. That's very important. If you have no power and you have an electric can opener, it will not work. You want to make sure you have a good first aid kit, because you may not be able to leave the house for a day or two if somebody cuts themselves or whatever they need. If you have a good first aid kit, that'll help. Finally, you want to have a printed or handwritten list of your loved one's medications, because they may have to go to an unfamiliar doctor. They may have to go to an unfamiliar hospital. Sometimes hospitals, if they lose power, they will divert to another hospital. You may not know anything about it. You may not be in their system, so you'll want that list.
Yep. And if you have multiple days to plan ahead, ensure that, your loved one just has all of those supplies that we just talked about, everything they need. Make sure their medications are filled. If they use, incontinence supplies, make sure that there are plenty of those things on hand.
And that's important, because if the weather's really bad, if there's a foot of snow on the ground, you may not be able to order from Amazon. It may take days for it to get there.
Right. We've probably all gotten almost a little too comfortable with how convenient everything is, and how, everything is just a click away, except that if there is severe weather in the area, you really can't completely predict how that might disrupt, the supply chain or Amazon drivers being able to get out on the road. I mean, there could be any number of, sort of trickle down effects. So the other thing I would say is, certainly just as important as having all of those supplies is knowing where they are when you need them. Could even be a good idea to have an inventory list with a location of everything, if you end up needing it. And I will say that Gagi did start, because we were talking about this weather a couple of days in advance, and suddenly she was like, where is my, well, first of all, she was calling it a lantern, which was confusing my brother and I. We were like, lantern, first of all.
Kerosene lantern, like the old days?
We're not in the pioneer. Well, I was going to say, we're not in the pioneer days, except we kind of were in the pioneer days recently with having to boil
Oh my God,
water.
seriously.
Right.
Well, no, I was thinking, when we were kids, we're Gen X. Everybody had a kerosene lantern.
Absolutely. So as it turned out, she was talking about, she has had for years this heavy duty, I guess you would call it a lantern flashlight. I mean, it's not like a handheld thing. It's more like got a handle on it, and it's almost like it's a little bit bigger than like a 9-volt battery. So it's pretty heavy duty. But anyway, it had gotten moved somewhere along the way. And I don't know who moved it. I don't know if she moved it. I moved it. My brother moved it. I don't know, except that finally I was able to locate it, and it was fairly out in the open and just not some place that we were really looking for it. I mean, down on the floor. But I was glad that she was thinking ahead, like, oh, right, if my power goes out, I need to make sure that I can see. So, good for her. And we did talk through a couple of other things that I'm sure my brother did with her as well, just to make sure that she, had everything that she needed.
Mm-hmm. So another type of planning needs to happen right before the event happens. So, for instance, you've got this forecast. They've been talking about snow for days and days and days and days. But this is like a day or two before. While you still have water, we keep coming back to water because, oh my gosh, I found what a pain it is not to have water. Fill up your bathtub. So you can have water you can use it for washing. You can use it for flushing toilets. If you don't have a bathtub, pick up a couple of the 5-gallon contractor buckets. You can get it at your big box hardware store. Fill those up. That's 10 gallons of water. That's a lot. So when we were down to a trickle of water, we filled up literally everything we could find. I found a bucket. It wasn't a 5-gallon bucket, but I found that. I found a couple of gallon milk containers that were in the recycling. And I also filled up an empty bottle of wine that I found in there. Jennifer had emptied the night before she left. Well, she emptied the rest of.
I was
she didn't finish
say,
all of it.
Could we put that in context?
No.
It's not as though I drank an entire bottle of wine
She had
the
just
night before I
emptied
left.
it. She didn't drink the whole bottle, but she had just emptied it the night before, and it was sitting on our counter the whole week.
You gleefully poured that out today and then sent a video in the family chat to you pouring.
I did. I was thanking
out.
that bottle for its service.
Yes. Well, let me just stop here just for a minute, though. So I know, at least I think sort of what we're talking about here is, we are helping our loved ones potentially fill it up, or if they're here with us, obviously we're doing the filling up. But I think about, I'm going to go to my mom. It was important that she had things filled with water that she could lift. Mm-hmm. She, has a pretty severe lack of mobility due to severe, rheumatoid arthritis. Like, she can't lift anything very heavy at all.
Right.
So, that's something else to keep in mind too. And frankly, squirrel here just for a moment. In general, when you're taking care of elderly loved ones, I know a couple of times my brother and I have had certain ideas about like, oh, we will just, set this up for mom so that she can, do it when she's on her own. Except that, then we come to realize maybe it was not something that she could lift or open or, whatever it might be. So you always have to have yourself a little bit in that mindset of, if I was 84 years old and I had a hard time getting around or my hands don't work very well anymore and I can't really lift anything very heavy, how would I manage this? So just wanted to mention that too, related to like my mom would not be able to lift, like we don't buy her gallons of milk. We buy her half gallons of milk because that's what she can lift.
Right.
So
Well, I came up with my mother recently too. She's decided she doesn't like the water out of the tap to drink at her assisted living. I've had it. It's fine, but she doesn't like it.
Some people just don't like tap water.
Sure. So she asked me when I went to the grocery store to pick up, she said, well, can you get me a big jug of water? And I got to the grocery store, and by the way, all week long, there was no bottled water anywhere in this region.
I believe it.
It was like toilet paper during COVID. It really was. People were just going nutso buying bottled water. But strangely, I think they had just resupplied, and they had some options for us. And I'm standing there looking, and I realized, for instance, a full gallon jug of water. That would not work. My mother does not. She would spill it all over the place. Yeah. So I found some smaller ones for her, and I just gave her some regular bottles of water either.
Yeah.
But, another thing, if a snowstorm is coming, turn up your heat a few degrees as the storm's coming there. You get your house nice and toasty in case you lose power. Then it's, got a little more heat in there to go away before it gets actually cold. If you have a gas fireplace, good idea. Go ahead and light that up. Make sure all your unused rooms have the door shut. And that's kind of a sad thing for us when the kids go away to college. We just go ahead and...
Or upstairs looks very empty.
You close the vents and shut the door. And it's that's when Jennifer just starts to cry. But make sure all your unused rooms have the door shut. If you're in an older house, it's great because a lot of times you can close up into one room. Unlike our house, we have an open floor plan. There's no way to shut off rooms downstairs. Yeah, it's just not possible.
Yeah. And, one final thing, definitely make sure, this seems like a no-brainer, right? But make sure that your cell phone is charged up and that you've got a good backup charger. If the power goes out, it might be your only way of communicating and learning about community resources in a true emergency.
Right.
And speaking of community resources, one thing that warmed my heart, and you see these stories all the time on the news when they're, situations, but it was lovely. There were a lot of local businesses here in our community who were, handing out water to people.
Right.
They had cases of water. There were restaurants that were able to get their hands on cases of water, and then they were just handing it out to people for free. So that was lovely.
The one that was most useful to us is there is a pretty big church right behind our neighborhood. It's a fairly new church. They moved from another part of town, and they announced, hey, guys, we have a well.
Yeah.
And
their
bring your
safe.
containers, and we'll fill them up. And I found a camping container. We had a big bladder with a spout on it that was 5 gallons.
5 gallons, yeah. Yeah.
Filled that up. It was quite useful for dishwashing.
And speaking of well water, right? Certainly, that came in handy for Hannah, who has a great friend who lives not far from us, but in a slightly more, rural area that also they have a well. So Hannah and her roommate were able to drive out there and get showers during all of this.
Here's the thing with wells, though. Anybody who has a well knows, okay, well, if the city water gets turned off, you're fine. But if the power goes out, unless you have some kind of backup battery or generator, your well's just dead.
That is true.
So that can be a problem, too.
So I think some of what we're saying with some of that, too, is whatever your situation is, your setup is at your home or your elderly loved one's home, just always have a plan B. Just be thinking through whatever the worst case scenario is, then what are the things that you can do at that point.
So a lot of these things we've been talking about, I mean, they're basic suggestions, whether you have an elderly loved one in your life or not. But now we're going to move into more of the elderly loved one stuff.
Right. It's critical to communicate clearly. That was a lot of alliteration there, by the way. Critical to communicate clearly. If things are about to get bad and you lived with your loved one, we didn't do it, Steve.
What, a lot of alliteration from anxious anchors placed in powerful posts.
For all of you Gen Xers out there, maybe you saw the movie Broadcast News, and that is a reference to that. If you haven't, go back and watch it because it's awesome.
It is awesome.
So it is critical to communicate clearly. If things are going to get bad and you live with your loved one, particularly if they have some type of dementia, tell them what they need to know, right? You know them best. So you know what they can handle, what they can understand. For example, it might be that if the power goes out, you need to convince them that you're going camping in the living room for a little while just for fun.
Just for fun.
Think about it very similar to if you happen to have, if you have children, any of you listeners out there, I mean, you may have had situations like that with your children. And it's a little bit of the same thought process. If you have someone in your life who is suffering from dementia or just in general is starting to have difficulty understanding things, maybe just try to make it fun. You know your person best, but definitely be sure to use clear, concise language and definitely stay calm. Again, it's like parenting. If you get freaked out, they are likely to get freaked out as well. So one of the best things that you can do in all but the most severe cases is remind your loved one that this really is something that's temporary and it won't last very long.
And, another thing, speaking of planning, which we were talking about earlier, but plan activities. It's just another type of pre-planning. But, if you're going to have an extended period without electricity, I'm thinking 2-3 days, which could easily happen. If your loved one likes games or puzzles, or even really if it's one night, if your loved one likes games or puzzles, keep a few around that they haven't enjoyed before, or one that it's like a puzzle, for instance. If they haven't done it for a long time, they may not remember. Or
as long as you have proper light source to also do the puzzle. Because if your electricity's out,
you
it's
need
hard
flashlights.
to see. But
yes,
you
of
got to
course.
make sure. Yeah.
Of course, but during the day.
Yeah.
But, at least you can use that for a little while to keep them happy. For instance, if your loved one likes knitting, make sure you have the supplies they need for that so they can kind of sit and do something that keeps them calm and keeps them happy. Another thing you can do, you can enlist your loved one to just help you do some chores. Again, this is busy work, but it works. Every elderly loved one is different, but things like folding laundry, making beds, it can kill some time and, kind of keep their minds off of things.
Yeah. Well, and even in general, like not even in storm situations, but I think about it with my mom too. Like, I'm reminded. So, we've talked before. I'm usually laundry duty. My brother is grocery shopping duty. I'm usually laundry duty. And, then I'm taking laundry back over to her a couple of times a week. And my default setting is to put everything away for her.
Right.
And she says to me, just leave it. Let me do it. It gives me something to do. And I do need to do a better job of that. Leaving it for her, that gives her something to do during the day. So it's kind of, I think, really what you're saying here is, chores or just other things around the house.
Just stuff to do.
It definitely keeps them busy. So
what about afterwards? What about after the crisis is over? So we just, for instance, the water, as we're recording this today, the water boiling restriction was lifted. And I happily went into the kitchen and dumped out all the pans of water that I had boiled, all but one. I think you're going to use that one to water some plants or something. I've dumped out the gallon milk jugs.
Actually, if I'd have caught you before you dumped all the other stuff out, I wouldn't have let you do that. Well, that's fine. No point in wasting it.
The one remaining pan is a big spaghetti pot. It's probably got 3 or more gallons of water. I think that's going to be plenty for the plants.
I know.
I think the plants are going to be just fine with that. We
might have wasted that resource.
It's true. But anyway, so what do you
forgive you?
What do you do? Well, you're going to have to because the water's gone. After the emergency is over, just clean up all the emergency supplies. Try to get things back to normal as quickly as possible. One great thing about elderly loved ones, particularly the ones who have dementia, and we've talked a lot about that, I know, but a lot of folks who are caring for their parents is because they have dementia. But one thing about dementia is they may just forget what happened and move on.
Yeah. well.
And that's, I guess,
not
a
a bad
good
thing,
thing
I
about
guess,
that.
when it
If you can
comes to
find
that.
a good thing.
Yeah. But truly, though, especially if you have supplies set out all over the place for them in the middle of, said situation that's occurring, it is, very important just to get everything put away. First of all, put it back in a place where you can find it again easily if needed, but also, just clear the way for normal living once again.
And speaking of our water outage from this past week, it was probably a good thing that Jennifer was gone for much of it because the kitchen area was quite a mess. It was just me and our son,
Goes
Jackson.
against my type A personality.
It was just the two boys taking care of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll admit, on Tuesday evening when we had no running water whatsoever, we both peed outside.
Oh,
it happened.
God. I know.
It happened.
I'm really glad I was not here.
Yeah. But and you would have had a harder time doing that.
Well, obviously,
being a girl.
I'm a camper.
Yes.
I am not
It's
above
not
doing
as though
that.
you've never done that before.
The backyard of my house in our suburban neighborhood.
And by the way, it was like 20 degrees outside with snow on the ground too. So that was not all that pleasant. Yeah. But yeah, the kitchen was quite a mess. We had 3 pans on the stove, all boiling at the same time. We had jugs of water around that I'd filled up with the little trickle of water that was coming out of the faucet. And we were trying to come up with everything we possibly could.
Yeah, when I got home from, I'll just share this with you guys out there. When I got home from the airport very late Thursday night, so of course things had been going on for about 3 solid days. I come in the house and I'm greeted by you, Steve, and Jackson, who was still home for the holiday break from college. And it was immediately, okay, we have a system.
Here's the system.
Let us explain to you how you have to do everything. Here is how you can brush your teeth. Here is what you can and cannot use.
And you immediately blew up the system.
I mean, did I really?
You did kind of. Either the next morning you made a pan of oatmeal on the stove.
Because I could boil water.
You could boil water.
To make my breakfast.
Yes, but cleaning the pan out was the problem.
Yeah, it was fine.
Yeah.
It was fine.
Well, and by the way, when the boil water restriction was lifted, I texted out to our family group chat, the boil water advisory is lifted, huzzah! And our son, who has now gone back to college, so he's an hour and a half down the road, he texts back, welcome to the first world. We've been waiting for you.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, that's his sense of humor.
In all seriousness, let me just say too, like how something like this does make you very grateful
for having drinkable water out of the taps and a toilet that flushes.
There are a lot of people who do not have those things.
It is true. So thanks to everyone for listening to this episode. We've rambled a lot about our particular problems, but hopefully we at least gave some decent tips. If you'd like to get in touch with us with a question, a comment, how's your mom? How's your dad? We love those. We read one earlier. You can email us at caregivinggenxstyle@gmail.com. You can also text us or leave a voicemail at 804-723-1221. You can find us on Twitter. The handle is at Gen X Caregiving. We're also on Blue Sky at the same handle, at Gen X Caregiving. We're also on Facebook. Just go to the show notes for this episode, and there's a link there, and just click on that link. It'll take you right there. That's where we post the most. So if you're going to join us any place on social media, go to our Facebook page. We hope to hear from you soon. Have a great day.
Good night, everyone.